You've been home for a couple of years now, buddy, but you're still fighting the war.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to, I would say, a special episode, but another episode of Shoulder to Shoulder, where we tackle issues that affect active duty military, veterans, and their families, and others who are affected by war. I actually memorized that, and that was pretty freaking amazing. Anyways, I am absolutely ecstatic to have a special guest who needs no introduction, but I will try my best to summarize. Dr. Catherine Selber, GCV's mom. God bless her. Just feel sorry for her immediately. Hello, Mom. How's it going? We're both in Texas. We're not in the same city, but you know.
Thanks so much I know that you have invited me on several occasions, and the calendar just never was syncing up, but I'm glad to be here. And of course, I've listened to a lot of your podcasts.
God bless you. You're the one. Oh, yeah. God bless you.
And so I'm new to this method.
Actually, you're not. So let me, my mom is a little bit humble, actually, a lot of intellectual humility. And she can attest to something that I hold dear. And she was a model for me. She is a professor at Texas State University. She's a full professor. She was recently the interim director for the School of Social Work. She's now currently on sabbatical because she is that good. And she, in a nutshell, took my deployments and turned it into an action plan across the state of Texas, creating networks to support veterans at different universities. So how did I do? That
was a solid, very succinct little bit there about my past many years of work. And I thought you did a great job. Yes. To all of that, I am a professor in the School of Social Work at Texas State University. For those of you who don't know where that is, that's about 30 minutes south of Austin.
The good part.
The good part. And so we are a university with about 39,000 students now.
Bobcats.
So, yes, the Bobcats. And we're growing, and we are on the run for a Research One institution. So lots of research being done on campus, lots of doctoral programs being added. And the School of Social Work has been where I've been housed since I've been there, which has been about 20 years now. I've been.
Oh my goodness.
University.
I feel like it was just yesterday that you got your PhD at the University of Texas after you had been teaching there, right? For like how long as an adjunct professor or what?
Yeah, I was there as a clinical adjunct professor for a number of years, about 10 or more.
Yeah.
And in that process, I decided I wanted to leave a perfectly good job and go into the doctoral program. And so I did that. And then very fortunately, there was an opening at Texas State. And I was able to get that slot, and I've been there ever since. And,
she's based, let me, I'm going to summarize all this, and I'm just going to say this about my mom. A lot of people say that they support the troops, but stickers are pretty cheap. You can get one of these hats anywhere. But I have met very few people, and this is subjective, and you can say it's subjective, but, go away, that have been in the trenches for veterans. And not just her son, which just been in the trenches with me, God bless her, but for numerous of my friends, units that were deployed. I'm looking forward to kind of sharing this story of how your career was changed by the global war on terrorism.
It totally changed my career.
Right.
I was a very quiet assistant professor, young assistant professor. And I was in social work education and field internship development. And then 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, your late father and I were counting how many days would it be before we heard from you that you were, in fact, leaving a program in academia and going to join. And so that's indeed what happened. And it changed my total career path, because once that happened, I realized that there was a need there for helping veterans transition back into civilian society. And really what happened was around 2004, we started seeing a flood of people come into universities. And in 2008, it really increased with the passage of the post 9/11 GI Bill. And when that happened, we happened to have a director of the counseling center who was a Vietnam veteran.
Awesome.
And he was very connected to other programs and other campuses. And he started advocating for campuses to get ready and to be responsive. And when that happened, he and I and a couple of other people, Melissa Hyatt and a couple of other key staff in the university, formed a Veterans Advisory Council. And this is kind of a little known fact that it is probably alarming to people in academia. We've met monthly since 2004. Monthly.
It's amazing.
And so we're 20 years into, this program development.
Well, I mean, you built it. You built the program. So let's kind of, I want to kind of talk, the listeners through I won't go through every deployment, but I think I'll go through some of the bigger ones.
Okay.
9/11 happened. And for those young listeners, that's September 11th, 2001, when Al-Qaeda took the planes and hit the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Google is your friend. I've encountered some people that's fine. Hey, people are young. It's okay. We got to learn. So I'm not going to ridicule. That's my New Year's goal. Anyway, so 9/11 happened, and I remember waking up, and I was like, and then I don't know what it was. It's 2001. Texting was on a flip phone, maybe. And I just remember turning on the TV, and I was like, "Oh, this is it."
Yeah. That's and Pops and I just said, okay, we had a bet between ourselves. It'd take 2 weeks for him to call and say he was leaving the university, or would he do it like overnight? And so it was 2 weeks almost to the day, and we both laughed about that later. And you said, well, I'm coming back to Austin, and I'm going to enroll in Texas State in their political science department, because the university where you were didn't have an ROTC program, and Texas State had a long tradition of supporting veterans and a long tradition of the ROTC programs, and you did that.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of launched my work with veterans also on campus, and especially in 2008 after the passage of the post 9/11.
Yeah. I mean, it's, for so many people, it's I am not a big fan of the 9/11 anniversary. It just saddens me. And I won't get into all the reasons why. I can go on and on for that for the rest of my life, and I probably will. But this isn't the place. But for me, I think the way I remember the story, and of course it's a story, so it's half fiction probably, and tales. I went to the Marines first. I wanted to do infantry, enlisted, and Pops was like, I don't want you, no. That was Pops intervened and was like, look, be an officer, don't be a trippy. He was my father, my late father, Joel Mark Selber, who was a buck sergeant in the Air Force. He was a turret gunner in the B-36 bomber and served during the Korean War. He always was the one that I kind of told what was going to happen, and I just let him relay it to you. Throughout the 20.
Yes, I was aware of that eventually. At first, I was not aware of it, but then I became very aware that was kind of relay of information was going on. Depending on what it was, I would get it secondhand.
Yeah.
And that was probably for the best because I do remember through, the first deployment, of course, I had no clue what
Well, I
I
mean,
gonna
we both did. So like, let's talk about that. So 9/11. I go to Texas State. Bobcats did 840. Have shout out to them. Great
Yeah.
school. Very affordable. Veteran friendly. They have a freaking river going right down the middle of it. I'm sorry, it's not paradise. I spent 2 great years as a Bobcat, and I'm always proud to say they're one of my alma maters. But once I commissioned, I became an officer, a second lieutenant. I went to Goodfellow Air Force Base, right,
Yes.
where the Air Force trains its intelligence officers. And then during the job drop, which is when you find out where you're going, I got my number one pick, which was 20th Security Forces Group, which is now called the Base Defense Group. It's in Moody Air Force Base. And it was
Right.
a non-traditional unit that did a lot of light infantry type of work. I won't get into the details and bore everybody, but I remember telling Pops this. I was like, he's like, what are you going to pick number one? I was like, this one right here. See, this one, they actually let me go outside the wire and get to pull the trigger. Because that's what I want. Because originally I was thinking about being a pilot, but my depth perception was just not there. I have some night issue, like blindness stuff. That wasn't in the cards. But what did you think that first time? Because I got to Moody in 2005, and it was a year later I was deploying, and it was like, it was real.
Yeah.
There is nothing like saying goodbye.
It was all academic until you got the word that y'all were leaving. And then one of the things I noticed, and this was true all through your many deployments, is that there's this period where they tell you that you're going to deploy, and there can be very many, well, we're not going that date anymore. We're going to go next month. And so those dates.
Hurry up and wait, baby.
Yeah. And that's hard on families because, and of course on, the military member, because, I used to say, I want the clock going in the right direction, which,
that's exactly right.
I want to know that you're already over there so that I can say, okay, there's only 364 days now left, 363.
Yeah. So the first deployment,
Yes.
the first deployment was like, people ask me about what the best or the worst or whatever. I always say the first was the worst, always. Yeah, for me, as a young lieutenant, as all young lieutenants are, God bless second lieutenants. They're when you see them wiggling around up there trying to lead, God bless them. I did the same thing. I got really lucky. I went with a great squadron full of really great airmen who were like military police, and our job was to train the Iraqi police. During that deployment, we had one of our chariot gunners receive the Purple Heart. I forgot his name. My apologies. The sniper ricocheted, hit him, I believe, in the shoulder, but I could be wrong. And then we lost Chavis, Leonard Chavis, in October. I'm sorry if the dates are all wrong, but sometimes I forget. They all go together. That 6 months, I came back and I was just totally different, And I just remember one day I was going through an alley in a really bad part of Baghdad because I got orders to like monitor a mosque. And, the driver is like, sir, we've been here for 5 minutes. I'm like, yep, just hold tight, put your legs up. Usually the EFPs take off people's legs. That's where they aim them for. And you look around when you're doing stuff like that and you see these trippies and they have their tourniquets pre-positioned. That's the real shit.
Yeah.
It's the real shit. And when you come home from that, it's a hard thing.
Yes.
Could you tell like maybe some of the listeners like what you did during that time? Because you became like almost like the official sponsor of
Oh,
the 824. I mean, Dr. Catherine Selber was just like, we are going to support the troops, and just like went into like hyperactive mode.
yeah.
Nobody outworks my mother. I tell you what.
No,
No,
no one, no one. Uh,
no.
okay, so action has always been my friend in terms of dealing with anxiety and worry. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that we did was, get groups of people in the university together
Yeah.
to support troops that were downrange. And of course, your unit was downrange. So I can remember sending hundreds of kites.
That was the second deployment, but yes,
Okay, toys,
goodie bags. Like, I
food.
mean, it was like
It was
constant.
production.
Dr. Catherine Selber was known. I just want so I want to tell a little anecdote here
Okay.
about the presence. So Leonard James was not my turret gunner. I didn't command him. I was doing human intelligence stuff. I won't bore you with it. But, one of the last conversations I had with him, he was like, hey, sir, like, your mom, like, these bags are really good, man. I'm like, I remember. He's like, is she like a medical doctor? And I'm like, no, she's a social work, PhD academic. He's like, what do they do? I'm like, stuff like this for a living. She's like, well, man, this is amazing stuff, and that was a real conversation I had with him.
That's awesome. I've not heard that before, but one of the things I did was I started teaching a veteran in transition troop course, for short, the troop course, and for social work majors and other majors in the university who wanted to work with veterans. And one of the things that I did in that course was they had to do some type of service for veterans. So they couldn't just read about a veteran. They couldn't just write about a veteran. They had to actually get to know a veteran, and they had to actually serve a veteran. And so they divided themselves into all of these action teams, and they would go out and fundraise to purchase the things to send to the troops. They would make these elaborate bags that they hand painted, and they would fill them up, and then we would go fundraise for the money to send them downrange. One year, I sent 656 boxes,
Yeah, I mean,
various units in the field.
yeah, I mean, so I'm going to put an edit here. Let's transition to the first Afghan deployment.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to pick it up right here. Yeah, I mean, all of your work, all of it, it's so hard because to pinpoint down where you were doing things, because my mother supported me through 6 deployments. 15, people get really hung up on numbers, and it really drives me crazy. It's like, well, is it 1,500 or is it 14? I'm like, I don't know. Go, here are my records. Just, and, for military family members, I was single throughout every deployment till the last one. And, it was me. I had dated some girls, and I don't get into that, but like, all I did throughout my 20 years really was fight.
Yes.
And, for me, Iraq was the one that really scarred me. But when I went to Afghanistan the first time in 2008, I really believed. I was like, this is the 2008, Bush is kind of focusing on Iraq, and the Afghanistan is like the war that is starting to heat up. And I'm like, I want to go there. And I volunteered, and I finally got in.
I never knew about all the volunteering until much later. I just couldn't understand how your number kept coming up for these deployments. And I would ask Pops, how is it that he is going over so many times? And Pops was just like, who knows? I don't know. Mysteries that kept happening. I always worried about that. There was a constant level of worry in the background. And another thing about all your deployments that really comes to mind is that taking action on campus and in Texas to do for veterans was kind of a deal I made.
Yeah.
I'm going to do, I mean, that's really
No.
I'm going to do for all the veterans and you take care of him. And that was a very unrealistic kind of unspoken, prayer that I would make. I'm going to do these things for these other veterans so that you will let him come back and live his life. But
Yes.
it always worried me that you kept going because the researcher in me said,
It's like, oh God. Yeah. I mean, look, I mean, I think, through all these deployments, I have a place of, I'm living in Texas now. I have my own place, all that type of good stuff. And, I'm home for the first time in 20 years.
right.
And, you really start when you retire or separate or get kicked out, whatever, you kind of like realize all the things you've done. And I think our listeners, instead of going through over every single one, I think, for me, it was Chavis, it was Yelner, it was Milton, it was, Casey, it was Richie, it was, God, the driver for Milton, whose name escapes me, and a bunch of other guys. And then it was time and living in a desert. That was the one, I'll be honest with you. At that point, when I was 2012, I spent a year in Gorak, more or less, living with Green Berets doing village stability operations. I am not a Green Beret, but whatever. I thought that was going to be the one.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I felt the most unsettled when you left Tampa. I felt the most unsettled about that deployment because, when it's the first one, you're just totally fearful of every single phone call you get. I used to take a shower with the phone right outside the shower so that I would be sure and not miss a ring. But as you move through the deployments, you start thinking, okay, I can do this. I know how to do this. But then you get to a point where you go, is there a point where it's more likely that something is going to happen because they keep going back? And so then you have to fight that type of anxiety. So yes, that one was one because you had been over there, several times. You had had several deployments and you were going to be gone a whole year. And I think I would lose it periodically during your deployments when I heard something that was just absolutely didn't make sense to me. And I was aggravated, like when you told me one time that they were dropping food into the village there and that y'all were eating bologna sandwiches. And I just was infuriated. I wanted to go to the SecDef immediately and complain that how could you expect people to fight if they didn't have any adequate food?
So, one of the things, I am a great, we call it rat fucking in the military. It's like when you people leave shit out and then you just go through it. You're like, well, I'll take that. That's great. All right. And so, people ask me all the time, why, 20 years, 1,500 days, and, why did you retire and what happened and all that type of stuff. And it's a long, sad tale. But, I think that deployment, then I spent 2 deployments, going to Kabul and advising at the senior level. And then finally, it was the last deployment, right? It was finally the last deployment. I tell you what, I didn't think I was going to die. That was actually one of the safest ones because COVID was going on. And so a lot of it's half my deployment, I was doing COVID engagements. But I think that deployment, was the beginning of me watching it all fall apart. I had the front row seats. I wasn't under General Miller's chain of command. That's a shame.
Yeah.
because I reported to the United States ambassador, and that's how defense attaché offices are supposed to work. They're supposed to work independently of the 4-star next door, and he's not supposed to have any undue influence on guys like me. I'll leave it to the listeners to read between the lines.
Right.
And I watched us abandon our allies, and it was just, I think heartbreaking is not a strong enough word.
Right.
I wrote about it today at Rugby Combat Veterans. Please subscribe, support the troops. I think that when we talk about Afghanistan and what happened, I think that there is a sadness, and I see it through veterans across all the services
Yes.
about what happened. Because you can say whatever you want on the stage. We've heard it all before. You're going to change things for the better. I hope you do. God bless you. But I tell you what, for the veterans and some in the new blood service members, not so much, but for the guys who'd spent and gals that spent the last 20 years fighting in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, blah, blah, blah. What happened in Afghanistan was just a devastating blow. I mean, and you saw it. My mother, God bless her, when Afghanistan fell, pitched in and was part of like Operation Sacred Promise and helping Afghans find resources.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about that whole
Sure.
thing?
Well, I think that, well, first of all, I want to make the point that the era of having combat veterans on campus, I mean, we still have some.
Yes.
Of course, it's a different era now, and they have not all deployed and certainly not all been in combat. But at that time, we still had a good number of veterans on campus who had deployed to Afghanistan, had deployed to Iraq, and that had a huge impact on them. And being known on campus by the veterans, they reached out to me, and, they would come by my office, they would call, they would want to do a Zoom call, whatever. And they were struggling.
Yeah.
And it brought everything to the forefront of, why did I do this?
Yeah.
This was, all of the betrayals that come, the moral injury, and of course, then their PTSD also would kick in, and an increase is well documented in when all of the emergency,
First responders and everything. Yes.
Right.
And I think, when we talk about combat PTSD, I like to when we talk about PTSD, and don't come at me with the PTS. I'm done playing the acronym game. I've done it for 20 years. I'm just going to go with PTSD. God bless you. I think it's important for our listeners, and it's a concept that I've been kind of noodling around, that there's combat PTSD. I have pulled the trigger, blah, 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 and going outside the wire, getting shot at. That's one. Now, what most people don't hear about is something I like to call espionage PTSD. It's for intelligence professionals who have spent the last 20 years supporting the global war on terrorism. I had troops that watched the entire debacle unfold by providing, linguistic support. I mean, these airmen had spent their entire lives mastering Pashto and Dari and Urdu and all this stuff.
Right.
And then in an instant, it was over. And the silence, I think, was so deafening. And in my opinion, it's one of the reasons why, Trump won the election, is that there was a red hot anger.
Yes.
And you saw it went in all the numbers, suicides, just
Visits to clinics.
yes,
The things that, become flags for veterans who are struggling. And, my view is what they really wanted was not perfection. What they wanted is to uphold the tradition of leaving no one behind,
Yeah.
and to understand that, someone has to be accountable for bad decisions that are of that nature.
Yeah.
And they didn't see that happen. And to make matters worse and to heap onto the moral injury already present, then the veterans were left with needing to be the ones to get the Afghans to safety as much as possible.
Yeah.
And so they spent their money, they spent their time, they were trying to multitask with their jobs during the day and at night, or with their academics during the day, and at night they were trying to get people out.
It was heroic.
It
Like
was
when we talk about so I want to kind of talk a little bit about this, the evac part. When Afghanistan fell to the Taliban, who we were at war with, the Taliban is allied with Al Qaeda. The Taliban is Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda is the Haqqani network. The Haqqani network is Pakistani ISI. I could go on and on forever. But when we lost the war and they beat us as we retreated, nothing against the troopies. This was the policy. I was there. Please lecture me more about the Doha Agreement. I love it. Watching it unfold and then being sucked into it while I was in command, leaving, going up there. Do you remember those 2 weeks? I'll be very honest with you. I don't. It's a blur.
I remember being very concerned for you because and for veterans, because I immediately knew what that meant. I understand, kind of having spent 20 years doing this work and seeing thousands of veterans, both at Texas State and, across Texas. I understand what something like that means for them on a day-to-day basis and for their well-being, because that undercuts their identity. It undercuts their whole story about why they served, what they got out of that, and how they can use that to move forward in life.
Yes.
Totally destroys that story, and now they're left with no story. And
It's exactly right.
It's so unfair to the veterans who worked and deployed and did for so many years. And it's also a huge undercut for families, because families then have to pick up the pieces.
Yep.
And, and those of us who support the veterans have to try to scramble.
Yep. Absolutely.
To make them, to support them.
Yes.
And,
It was when my mom, Dr. Selber, I think what we're talking about here is the abject betrayal of American combat veterans. I want us to sit here for a moment because it's important for listeners to unpack this, because I get this a lot. This is the one where people kind of poke around. I'm well aware, and my mother is well aware, that there are many Afghans that weren't great and that they were trying to kill us. Thank you very much. They were trying to kill me many times. But your mileage may vary. I enjoyed my time with the Afghans, and I found them to be worthwhile allies if you studied their culture and tried to learn their language, which I was able to do somewhat. And so I grew up on with it. I believed.
yeah.
I spent my life being like, when you deploy this often, right? One of the things that you do is that you just make a deal with yourself. I'm going to die doing this. I had that conversation with myself every deployment. I would sit, I would look into the sun, and I would be like, I'm ready.
And
that was every time,
Yeah.
even when the ones were like, I'm going to be in the embassy. But hey, man, we took indirect fire all the time. They're just bad shots.
Okay, I didn't know that. See, I'm
Yeah.
just learning new things. The more that I get to be around you, which has not been much in 20 years, that I keep learning. But there's a sadness that develops in
Yes.
from the betrayal,
Yes.
and it's unlike any other experiences they've had.
Yes.
And it's such a disservice to the veterans because they deserve us to support them in whatever path they choose for their well-being. And
Yes.
this totally undercuts their well-being. And it does so for a number of years. Doesn't mean that it has to always be that way, but it means that they have to work extra hard to try to hold on to something positive that tells them that it was not
For nothing.
for nothing. There's a double negative in there, but I'm
No,
going to
no. I mean, like, look,
not for
you
nothing.
have to change the story that you tell yourself about yourself. That's,
Yes.
whatever story, whatever narrative that you have about your life, and everybody has their own trials and journeys, right?
Right.
A journey forward. I think that when we talk about transition from the military to civilian, I just want to let's noodle this one out. I think that the entire phrase transition should be taken outside and hit with a baseball bat.
Could be time. It could be time to let that one go.
Because I remember sitting at some stupid briefing. God bless the guy who had to do it. He's just doing his job. It's not his fault. But it's 40 and above and E8s and above. So executive level stuff, right? People. And we all show up on time 15 minutes before. And we're all wearing the same shit. It's hilarious. And, I'm in the front row ready to take notes, and you just start listening to the first words out of this guy's mouth was, congratulations on retirement. You achieved blah, blah, blah. Now you have the most challenging, he said something now there's another test and it's going to be hard and it's going to be a struggle. You transitioning into the civilian world. And I remember sitting there and I'm like, hold on. I wanted to raise my hand and be like, hey, why is this going to be so hard? Everything I just did was really difficult. Why is it up to me to transition to you? I don't think so. I just don't like this. The whole phrase. It's how is your transition going? I'm not transitioning, excuse my language, to shit. I am finding out who I am again after spending 20 years of my life killing people on behalf of the killing terrorists on behalf of the American people and its government.
Yes, I can see that. And I can see that transition, it was useful in the beginning, when you looked at different roles, when you were coming out of the military and going into campus.
Yep.
And we had this really nice little diagram where we showed, the transitions that a veteran goes through. But as time went on, it's insufficient. I mean, there were so many issues that it's not just about transition for one person. There was a whole lack of community preparedness for all of this. And although we got better at that, let's talk about the state of Texas, we got better at that and we are so much better off than most.
Yes.
It was not sufficient to support as many people who were leaving the military and coming back into careers or to campus. And so, community has to be prepared if they are going to support the veteran who lives among them. It's not just transition. That sounds very,
it's
isolated.
I just reject the concept.
Yeah.
That it's up to me to do this. Absolutely not. I'm going to be me. And if American society can't meet me halfway, that's perfectly fine. I've been living on my own for a long time. So, I think one of the things that, the Trump administration has an opportunity here to do some great things. If you hate them with all your heart, God bless you. I have written all my opinions on President Trump. He won the election. So, this is how it works. I hope that he's able to take a stick of dynamite and blow up the VA. This is just Colonel Will Selber, retired opinion, not Dr. Catherine Selber's opinion, just mine, as somebody who has attempted to use the VA and felt like I'm hitting my head up against the wall repeatedly. I think when we think about, when we think about veteran health care, we talk about military families. We talk about the recruiting crisis. Don't believe the numbers. They're barely up. The recruiting crisis has to do with the fact that military families are not recommending service.
Correct. And
Let me ask you a question. Mama.
okay.
Let's go mama to son.
Okay.
Would you recommend to an 18-year-old that they join the military?
No.
So this is why.
Because there isn't adequate services within the military to support them. And after they leave the military, there's not adequate services to support them. So there's got to be changes at the community level and in veteran service organizations and other federal and state services. I mean, we're still struggling with getting enough people that have, what they call cultural competence in the military.
Yes.
And that's after 20 years. I mean, how is it possible? I've been saying the same thing for 20 years. Please let us flood the zone and allow them to go into the community and not have to pass a test to go to the community to get services of any kind if they so choose, because there are a lot of great, I'm going to speak about social work. There are a lot of great social workers in the VA, and I love the training they provide for our social workers. I've worked with them for 20 years as well. But the system itself is too large.
Yes, it's too big. It's too bureaucratic. It's impossible.
Very difficult.
This is not a shot. There's a lot of great Americans trying to help veterans inside the VA. I will just admit that.
Yeah.
But ladies and gentlemen, like last month while everybody was navel gazing about whatever, another veteran smoked himself in a parking lot inside this country. And the fact that just happens and everybody just kind of shrugs their shoulders, I think it's a moral stain on the country.
Well, for example, we have this funded project to create stories for what we call legacy veterans. And we digitize those stories working with their family and friends, and so that they are memorialized. We have a veteran on campus who has had a little shy of 20 losses and in his career in the military. And that is a huge amount of loss. It's our responsibility to do whatever it takes.
Yes.
Period. I don't care if I have to personally go to campus every other day and meet with that person. I don't care if I have to develop all the resources just to get that person through his degree. He deserves that. And and the bureaucracy doesn't support that.
It's just, I think when we talk about services to veterans, one of the things is that there's just so many options, and then you have to apply for them. And it's just, as we wind up this conversation, and we talked a lot about service and supporting troops and stuff like that, and some of our aggravations. I also want to kind of end it on a little bit of a high note. I want everybody to understand that I often criticize the DOD because that's my job. I mean, that's what I like to do. Okay? I'm a grumpy combat veteran, but I have bros and sisters that are still there. I have troops that are in harm's way, friends of mine that go deploy. It's a real thing for me. And what I hope is that the military at some point realizes that they're going to have to pay us more. And you're going to have to increase everybody's salary, because Look, I am a statistic along with every veteran, and I have been retired for 6 months. I'll be brutally honest. And I had an encounter with the police. Check. I got wrongfully detained. Check. I got the VA abandoned me. Check. I got sent to a state mental hospital. Check. And was completely treated pretty poorly. And so, when I look at the last 6 months of my life and the divorce and all that type of stuff, you realize that hey, I'm just like everybody else who gets out. Ain't gonna be no different for me. In fact, it'll be harder, right? I have I want to end it on this note that, I and my mother are huge advocates of mental health.
Yes.
There's nobody, my God, I have been doing mental health since, the first time I deployed,
Right.
it
That
wasn't,
was one of your strengths that you
yeah,
always came back and, did all the, had all the tools, the exercise, the counseling,
yeah,
journaling, the writing, all
yeah.
of the things.
I think when I want to GCV's mom, Dr. Catherine Selber, who has been a champion for soldiers, sailors, Marines, guardsmen, guardians, whatever, reservists, all you guys and gals. Of course, she's my mother, and I'm incredibly proud of her for all the things that she does because, when you have to get into the trenches with veterans, you start to realize what they did and that they are now processing,
Yes.
I don't remember most of some of my deployments. I couldn't tell you, oh my God, I don't remember him. I remember him, whatever.
Sure.
And when you come out and you're trying to relay that information to the American public, this is a true story and we'll end it here. I would just want to get your reaction and we'll wrap it up. I'll do some editing. Don't worry about it. Recently, I was in the great Midwest and I went to a nice steak restaurant and I sat at the bar, blah, blah, blah. And I walked in and I had this shirt on and I had some scarves and whatever. And I sat down and the lady next to me was like, I just want you to know I think you're funny. And I was like, holy smokes. Hi. And she was like, I want to look in your bag. And I was like, no. And those are the things when veterans have to come up upon that. And I understand the whole stolen valor thing, but it's intense. And for veterans, I will just say this. There's nothing wrong with you.
Correct.
You're having a perfectly normal reaction
Yes.
to a life-altering event.
And no one.
Excuse me one second.
Okay.
What the problem is that there's something wrong with American society.
Yes.
So I would like for you to close out. Please provide some, what you're doing in the future, blah, blah, blah.
Well, we've started doing a lot of well-being studies and trying to understand a different frame of reference for veterans. And I just think it's hugely important that people realize that you can have all of the tools that you need to succeed outside of the military after you leave the military, but the society is not prepared for it.
Yep.
And so, like you, things can happen.
Yep.
And then if you don't have a support system, which many veterans do not have when they get out,
Yep.
then you're into a whole nother layer of hurt.
Yep.
That doesn't go away. So
Yep.
many veterans that get picked up by the police that end up in, a mental health emergency, hold or something, they then commit different things that then don't allow them to leave. So it is not a matter of a nice little clean transition. Veterans are at risk when they get out, and they must have a knowledgeable, committed, heartfelt support system so that they can have someone.
reintegrate so that they can reintegrate,
Yes.
right? So that they can come back in. So
Yes.
let's end it here. I
Yes.
want, so I want to thank Dr. Catherine Selber for coming on my show. It's been a delightful treat to talk with my mom. She's one of my personal heroes. There is nobody that I've ever met in my life who, a military family member who has just dedicated her life to honoring the sacrifice of an entire generation of veterans who feel that they've been humiliated and betrayed. And it takes a special type of professor to sit in the trenches and show through leadership that you don't label us, stop telling me all the diagnosis, and
Right.
sit down and have a conversation with us. Don't repeat stupid sayings like hurt people hurt people. We've all read that book.
Right.
And
Have
get
to
to
be
know
willing.
people.
Yes, you have to be willing to sit in the courtroom. You have to be willing to sit in the mental health unit. You have to be willing to go down and find them when they're lost somewhere.
Yep.
You have to be willing to do that level of work if you're really going to make a difference in a veteran's life, because it's not going
Absolutely.
to always go smoothly, people. It's
Yep.
not going to go smoothly.
Yep.
So,
Well, I just want to say that, even though it's not always going to go smoothly, this country is better for having its veterans. Keep on fighting and struggling and, keep your head up and chin up, because
yes.
just always remember that you've already done more than most of the American population will ever even understand. And if you are just a cook, you're a good, God bless you. And if you're like some super secret guy, like that killed bin Laden, that's really cool too. But we're all on the same team. And I just want to thank Dr. Catherine Selber, my mom, for coming on the show. We look forward to having her write more articles.
Okay.
And doing more stuff for a grumpy combat veteran. I will leave it out to you to close. So any parting words, Mom?
It's been an honor of my life to serve veterans, and I'll go out that way.
Yes, ma'am. It's a fine cause to dedicate your life to. We
Yes.
are a special breed of humans.
Very worthy. Very worthy.
And we are complicated creatures for sure.
You are indeed.
And I just want to thank you on behalf of all veterans for your lifetime of work to support those who are often forgotten when they come home. So on behalf of Grumpy Combat Veteran, I'm GCB6. I'm not going to cry. And I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Please give us 5 stars. Share it with your friends. Share it with your enemies. I don't really care. As long as you share it with somebody, I'm going to be happy. And you can say you supported the troops. All right. This
All
is
right.
GCB6. Until next time, we are out.
Thank you.